Okay, so now you have a threaded needle with a knot at the end of the thread. Now I'm going to show you how to join the two pieces of fabric together. These are your practice pieces of fabric. We're not going to learn on our squares. We're going to learn on these two little rectangles. So lay them down on top of each other and just focus on lining one side up. Don't worry if it doesn't match at other places. That doesn't matter at all. This is a practice piece. Make it match along one side. Then I want you to do something again with your ruler. I want you to take your ruler. There's the 1 inch mark, and halfway between the end and the 1 inch mark, there is 1/2 inch. I want you to put that 1/2 inch mark down right next to the edge of your fabric. Let me pull this up so you can see it a little bit better. I've got the 1/2 inch by the edge of my fabric. And I am going to take a pencil and I'm going to mark right at the end of that ruler. So that's 1/2 inch from the edge. Then I'm going to go to the very middle and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to put the cut edge of the fabric on the 1/2 inch and I'm going to mark at the end of my ruler. And I'm going to do that yet a third time near the other end. Then I'm going to turn this around this way. You can see my 3 hatch marks. Those are sometimes called hatch marks. I'm going to lay my ruler down, and I want to put it where I can see all 3 hatch marks, sort of, okay? Sort of. Right there. And then I'm going to hold this ruler down, and I'm going to very lightly make a straight line close to the edge of the fabric. All right, so I have a straight line that travels through those hatch marks at the edge of my fabric. All right, now we're going to make a line of stitching right here at the edge of the fabric. I want these two pieces of fabric to stay together, so I'm going to use a pin toward the end and I'm putting it through both layers of fabric. I'm going to do that close to the center. Push the pin down, lift it up, and push it through. The pins, remember, are different than needles. The pins have that little head on the end that keep you from pushing it all the way through. You can push a needle all the way through fabric because there isn't a place on the needle to stop it from going through. So pins are for holding fabric together while you sew. And I have just inserted 3 pins into this practice piece of fabric. Now I'm going to get my needle that is threaded and that has a knot on the end of it. You do not care if the knot ends up on the right side, but I'm going to start. I'm going to go very close to the edge of my fabric on the line, and I'm going to insert my needle down, and then I'm going to pull my needle back up, and I'm going to take a small stitch. This is a small stitch. I have gone down and up with my needle. Now, people tend to think about sewing as that you just keep on going down and up, down and up, down and up, down and up, and following and going forward. That is called a running stitch. If you just continue to go down and up and down and up and down and up, called a running stitch. It is a very weak sewing stitch and will not hold. We're going to be doing a back stitch. So after you take your very first stitch and you've gone down and up, this is what you're going to do next. You're going to pull the thread down below you. You're going to hold your fabric up here. The way I hold my fabric is like having a pair of scissors in this hand and a clamp over here. This is my left hand. Let me push that away so you can see it. I have pointer and the tall man with like scissors, and then ring man and the little finger like a clamp with the thumb. And if I pick this up and I clamp it here at the edge, and I pinch it like that, and then I clamp here, I can hold this up and I can work with it a little bit better. So I am going to hold this up and I'll show you how we're going to make a back stitch. A back stitch instead of coming up, going in down here, after you make your first down and up, you go back into almost the same hole with the front of your needle, and then you come up ahead of where your thread is. Notice the thread is about in the middle. In fact, I'm going to back it off and make this stitch a little bit smaller. It almost makes a T. You go down behind where your thread is. You come up in front of your thread, not in the same place. You push your needle through and you pull it. And you have one back stitch, okay? To make the second back stitch, you pull your thread downward, hold it down with your thumb. You insert your needle in the end of the first stitch that you just made. And then you bend the fabric and you come up just a little ahead of where you were, and you pull it. Now you have two back stitches in a row. Let me see if I can get a little more light on this and pull this up where you can see what my hands are doing even better. Okay, so you can see my two stitches. I pulled my thread all the way. You don't want to leave a long loop on the back. All right, you always want to pull your thread until it catches, but you don't want to pull it too tight. So I have two back stitches and I have a space. So we're going to do a third back stitch. It's called back stitch because you step backward to put your needle in at the end of the stitch that you just made. You can even put it in the same hole. You can see it's where the last one was. And then you come back up just a little bit ahead of where your thread is, so that when you push this through, you close that third stitch. You have to hold your fabric tight, and you create a new space. So here's stitch number 1, 2, 3, and I'm set up for the fourth stitch. Pull the thread downward, insert your needle at the end of the last stitch you made, then pull it up on the line just in front of where your thread is. And then push the needle through, switch your hand and pull it from the front, and then pull it until it's not so tight that it makes your fabric buckle, but make sure there's no thread left on the back. You can see what the back of it looks like. Let me do it again. You insert your needle in the back of the stitch that you just made, and you come up in front of your thread. And this is what a back stitch looks like. You do that over and over again. I'm going to keep doing it for a second so you can watch. This one is probably a little bigger than I would want it to be on my pillow. The bigger your stitches are, the looser they will be. For practice, this is okay, but what you want to get to where you can do is you can pull it up quite close to where your last stitch was and make your stitches a little smaller and a little finer, all right? A back stitch seam is very strong because it is overlapped on the back. And if your thread ever breaks on a back stitch seam, your whole thread doesn't come out. Now take a look. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to run out of thread. Can you see how much shorter my thread is? Because my thread is now all here and on the back, overlapped on the back. So my thread is getting short. I'm going to do probably 2 more stitches, and then I'm going to show you how you end it. You can't just cut it. If you just cut it, it comes undone. That makes sense. You have to have another way to stop it. We stopped it at the first with this knot. The knot is holding it, but we can't tie a knot in the other end of it. So let me do 2 more stitches. Pull your thread down below the line, insert your needle in the end of the last stitch that you made, come up pretty darn close, but not in the exact same hole as your thread. Notice you're going to make a stitch and a space, and that space is important. One of the mistakes kids make is they want to bring it up in the same spot. You go down in the end of your last stitch, but you go beyond where your thread is to set up a space for the next stitch. And I'm going to do 1 more, and then I'm going to show you how to end it using a tailor's tack, okay? Now, I have just enough to do a tailor's tack. If I keep stitching, I won't be able to anchor this thread. To do a tailor's tack, you then, since you don't want to make this longer, you come up, you go down in here and you come up exactly where you were before and you make a stitch. But this is what you do next. You do that again in the same spot. Now you have piggyback stitches, 2 on top of each other. And you're going to do that one more time, and you're going to put a 3rd stitch. And see how it's going to be hard for me to get this 3rd stitch in. I probably should have ended it a little bit before I did. Push it through and pull that a 3rd time. That is called a tailor's tack. You can see where it is. It's thicker. It's got 3 stitches in a row. So now I can take my scissors and I can cut pretty close to the tailor's tack. It will not come undone. This little piece of thread that's left gets thrown away. All right. Now I have another piece of thread cut. It's about 24 inches long. Remember, I used my ruler. I'm going to go through the threading process again and the knotting process, and I'll show you. I'm going to do it pretty quickly. I'm going to cut it at a point. I'm going to hold it very, very, very close. Remember the little lizard that sticks out its tongue? I'm going to hold it close to the eye of my needle and push it in to the eye of the needle, and then grab it with the other fingers while it's through. Then I'm going to make these even, very, very even, and I will do the twist, the twisted loop. So I've got the 2 ends even. I put them on the pad of my finger. I hold it with my thumb. I go around once. I begin to rub downward with my thumb, and I make the loop. Twist, 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 twist. You can see the twisted loop. Then you hold it in place. You pull down on the twisted loop, and you have a big knot, and that's good. So when you get ready to start again after you've ended, you want to go down close to where you ended and come up. Now you have the space you're looking for, so you can start back stitching. You go down in that space again, you come up right in front, and you pull. You go down in the space that you just did, you come up, and you pull. Now these are pretty big stitches. When we start working on our pillow, you're going to want to make these as small as possible, and you make them smaller by coming up closer to your thread, but not at the same place of your thread, just a little bit more. You can make these as small as machine stitching. It will take you a little bit longer, but your pillow will be much stronger for when you put the fluff into it. So I'm going to go down and then up, and I'm going to pull, all right? Down, up, and pull. And this is what you are going to do to finish this line of stitching, all right? I'm going to go ahead and work on it. And you may watch. Let me pull this. I like to get this below the line. Down and up and pull. Another stitch and another space. And then down. Let's come out a little bit ahead of that. Up and pull. Another stitch. Down. Down behind. Connected to the last stitch. Connected to that stitch. Up ahead. And then pull. And down and up in one motion. It's like pinning. It's like the pinning that we did, down and up. By the way, I can now take this first pin out because my stitches are going to hold these 2 pieces of fabric together. All right, so we pull and then down. I want you to practice this line, and anytime you run out of thread or you get short, you're going to do that tailor's tack, which I'm going to do again right now. I don't need to because I still have a lot more thread, but I want you to see how to do a tailor's tack. In the end, you will do a tailor's tack at the other end to keep it from coming undone. So that means if I were about out of thread and I were ready to end this line, I would act like I'm making another stitch, but instead of coming up ahead like that, I would come up when I'm finished. I don't want to move ahead anymore because I'm almost out of string. I would come up right where my thread came up before. There's one stitch. Now I'm going to piggyback the second stitch right on top of it. And then I'm going to piggyback the third stitch right on top of that. All right, right on top of that. And after I've done it 3 times, it will not let go. Here's the last one that I just ended. Now I ended it again. You may cut, and then you get a new piece of thread, thread your needle, do a knot of some sort. I'm going to roll this one off. That's my favorite kind, the twisted loop. Pull it, got a knot, and then you come up in the end of your tailor's tack, right in the end of your tailor's tack on the line. Your first stitch is just a down and an up, like a running stitch would be, and then you go back to stepping back for the back stitch, move forward to set up a new gap, pull the stitch complete, go back and insert here. It's almost like from the back you move forward 2 steps, and in the front you step back 1 step, and you count that as a step, and you set up for the next gap by going forward. Now I'm really needing to do, look how little thread I have. So if I don't do a tailor's tack now, then I'll run out of thread and I won't be able to. So I'm going to go down in the last stitch, but now that I'm ending this thread, I don't move forward. I come right up where my thread came up before, and I make 1 stitch. Let's piggyback the second stitch on top. 3 stitches on top of each other is called a tailor's tack, and it's better than a knot. It never lets go. So you can see where my 3 tailor's tacks are. Now I want to show you what this seam looks like. When we open it up, I want you to see that we have created a place where our fabric is held together. See, I've sewn that far. So I can open these 2 pieces up, and they are joined right here. This is called a seam. And the tighter you make the stitches, the less they pull apart. See, I'm kind of pulling on this. Look how strong that seam is. It's very strong, and when you iron it flat, you've got a wonderful seam. This is how we're going to join our squares together. All right? So if I were going to continue on this piece, I would simply come up at the end there after I thread a needle and get a knot, take 1 stitch forward, come up, and then begin to loop like you do when you backstitch. Down at the end of the last stitch, up ahead of your thread. Down at the end of the last stitch, up at the end of the thread. And when I got all the way to the end, I would do another backstitch right here. I hope that's helpful. You can watch this again and watch it and stop it and study it and see if you can figure this thing out. It's not hard, but it may be awkward if you've never sewn. Keep trying. All right, can't wait to see your pillows.